Hi everyone, Armoured Pants here, and I have another video for you in the American line. This is the Tier 5 TD, the M10 Wolverine. And it is an iconic tank, not just in Blitz, it's first TD in the American line, but also it's an iconic World War II tank. It was the most produced TD of the war, with over almost 6,500 produced. It saw service not just in the US forces, but also in British, through Lend-Lease, in the Russian forces, Free French, and later on after the war it went into service with the Israeli and Chinese forces. It is obviously not as sexy, it doesn't have the same mythos to it as the Panther, the Tiger, or even the Sherman, but it was nonetheless a very effective and very influential tank destroyer during World War II. Known not as the Wolverine then, that nickname came about towards the end of the war, or actually even after the war, but just as the TD. That's what most American forces just refer to it as, the TD. And it was very effective. It was reliable. It served in all theatres. On the Western Front, we see it here on the Pacific Front, Pacific theatre, and it was very effective. And one of the most influential tank destroyers, if not tanks, of World War II. And of course, for those of us who love history and love the history of tanks, getting to roll out these tanks in Blitz is one of the attractions. Here it is here, a restored version outside the Overlord Museum in Normandy, and and I think it has a rightful place there because it was indeed an effective tank and one that served with distinction in Normandy in 1944 after the D-Day landings. So an iconic tank, not just in Blitz but also in real life in history. So let's have a look at the tech spec of this tank as it stands in Blitz. Obviously it has different characteristics than it did in real life, and we'll use blitzhanger.com to do that. So in terms of provisions, I would run standard fuel and coke to max out the TD's performance. It is the first TD you come across in this line, so we need to be aware of that. There are two gun options. Both are 76mm. The Top Gun has the best DPM at 1538 damage points, plus Top Gun also has better reload, 6.24 seconds with gun rammer, 6.71 if you use calibrated shells. You can use both. I usually use gun rammer, but calibrated shells are also a good option. 128mm of pen going up to 134 with calibrated shells with AP, 177 going up to 186 with APCR, and 40 going up to 44 with HE. Muzzle velocity is not bad, it's 1013 meters per second, and it's 1287 meters per second with APCR, so just bear in mind APCR has faster muzzle velocity, the round travels faster. I would use a gun rammer, supercharged and refined gun on this vehicle to max out that gun performance. It has 10 degrees of gun depression, 20 degrees of elevation, so it's good gun alignment, which makes it an effective sniper, effective for hold down. You can fire over hills with great effect, so bear that in mind when taking up those positions. And it has good gun handling. Its G index is just under 10k at 9.63, which is not bad at all. This is only a tier 5 tank, so it's not bad at all for a tier 5 tank destroyer. It's good power to weight ratio too, and it does 48 kilometers per hour top speed. Unlike many American vehicles that have poor power to weight ratios, this tank actually has decent power to weight ratio, will take off quickly. This is great for TD because it allows you to get into those TD positions early in the game, take up your position. It also has decent concealment. Something with a view range of 272 meters needs to get within 194 meters of you to spot you. Even when you fire, they still need to get in 238 meters, so it has good concealment numbers, and it has some armor, so you will get bounces. If you look here at the armor profile, the relative armor numbers on the side are good. It has a bit of armor on the bottom plate as well, not so much in the front part of the hull, and it has that gun mantle which takes up a large portion of the turret, so you will get some bounces. It has some spaced armor in the back of the turret, so this tank will give you some bounces. But this tank is not really about that. This tank is about moving forward quickly from the start off, getting into a TD, a sniping position, using that good gun handling, that good reload, and that good DPM to put damage into the enemy. In terms of tactics for this tank, well, that's really what you should be doing, right? Now, because of its speed, experienced players may be tempted to use this as a medium. but it has one serious drawback if you want to play it that way, and that is its traverse. Its traverse is truly horrendous, and we're going to discuss that a little bit later on. In terms of its armor profile, you can see here when you're up tiered, you're not going to bounce so many shots, but when you're top tier, you're going to get some significant bounces and against your own tier. And we look here at the tactics, as we said. I mean, this is a classic TD. It has all the characteristics of a TD. It's good for long range sniping, and therefore I would recommend when you're playing this tank first, and then maybe your first time to TD, play it as a TD. Play from the back, use the speed to get into those positions quickly, allow your fast movers, your lights and mediums to spot out the enemy, and use that good gun handling, that gun depression and that DPM to farm damage and support your team. And this tank is very effective at that, and because it's so fast, you can get into those great TD positions very early on in the game. Now I want to have a mini tutorial now. We're going to take a time out before we look at gameplay, and it's to discuss traverse on gun alignment and why it's important in this tank, particularly when you start off to fight from distance. So let's take an example here. Here you are here on the left, you're the American tank, and you're going to fire into the German tank, let's say here the B2, P2, PZB2. Now you are, let's say, 120, 150 meters away, right? Now you're firing straight on into the tank, not a problem. If the enemy tank decides to move, even if it moves, let's say 30 meters, right? We're going to have a look at how that affects your ability to realign with the target as it's moving or after it has moved. And we're going to look at some basic mathematics, simple geometry, to see what aiming arcs look like over distance, and why when you start with this tank it's important to fight from distance. And it's because the traverse is slow, and we're going to use basic mathematics and basic geometry to discuss that. So when you're firing from distance, and let's say that is 120, 140 meters, maybe more, you can see that you have to traverse your gun maybe just 15 degrees to realign from where the target was to where the target is now, even though he's moved 30 meters, right? So it's simple. And even if you've got slow traverse, traversing through 15 degrees is not a big deal, and you can realign very quickly. However, let's take another example here on the left where the tank moves 20 or 30 meters, but it's much closer to you. Now you have to traverse 90 degrees, and if you have a very, very slow traverse, that is a significant problem, and the Wolverine's traverse is awful. So basically the same movement in terms of meters creates a huge difference, so therefore you need to be cognizant of that and be aware of that, and that's why I would suggest fighting from distance, particularly when you get this tank and it is new to you at the start. Later on, when you become more experienced, of course, you can go and engage the enemy closer up, but at the start, be aware of this slow traverse. Keep your traverse as limited as possible and as least as possible by fighting from distance. So I hope that makes sense. So we're going to have a look at a couple of games here. First one is on Faust. I think both games are going to be about 1.4, 1.5k of damage, which with a tier 5 tank and TD is not bad at all. In this first game we are up tiered, but as I said, this tank is fast moving. So exactly what we discussed in the technical spec when looking at the characteristics of this tank, we're going to push up. We're going to go with the mediums. You can see how fast it is. You can see its power to weight ratio in effect here. It's well able to keep up with the medium tanks. And we're going to just adopt a classic TD position on this map. We're going to push on past the SU-100. We're going to go up here, take some soft cover in this bush, open up fields of fire onto A, and see what we can, what damage we can do. Have a look here. I track him. I thought he was moving forward. Tried to do a tracking shot. Ended up just tracking him, ironically, if you'll pardon the pun. You can see why this tank is an effective TD with that power to weight ratio, because it allows you to get into this position very, very quickly on the map. And then look, there's multiple targets opened up, and multiple fields of fire opened up, and this is exactly what you want when you are a TD, right? Gun handling here in play, beautiful shot on the WWII T34, and this is exactly what you want. when you are a TD, you want to get into a position where you have multiple fields of fire that have opened up for you. My team are playing well because my mediums and lights have spotted up the enemy. I'm sitting back and I'm supporting them, doing damage, and helping them clear off the tanks. Max roll there of 200 damage points. And you can see that I enable my teammate to clear off the Crusader by putting another round into him. There's my compatriot there, put one into him, roll back into cover. And I decide then I'm going to go around. And again, you know, I started off in a classic TD position, but because this tank is maneuverable with that power to weight ratio, it enables me to adapt new positions pretty quickly. And that's why it's quite flexible. It's not a slow moving TD where you can get stuck in a position and not able to influence the game. You're going to see the gun depression in action here. You know, that 10 degrees of gun depression in action here. Exactly what we looked at on the tech spec. Capturing the base and putting in damage on the enemy. You know, what more can you ask for, particularly when you're lower tier in a game? Capture the base and now the game is pretty much over. We have 4v1 situation, we have a base captured, and you know, it's just game over now. It's just tidying up and mopping up operation. Apart from traverse, the tank also has a terrible turning arc, so you'll find when you're trying to corner in this tank it handles like a dog, but then it's not a medium tank. And one of the mistakes that many players make with this tank is that because of its maneuverability, and they start playing with it, they think, oh, this is almost like a medium tank. But when you try to turn and you try to traverse, you find that it is not a medium tank and doesn't handle anything like a medium tank. And that can be a problem, and that's why until you're very comfortable with this, I recommend fighting from distance and taking note of the geometry lesson that we looked at earlier, and the distance in the traverse arc between a target which is far away and a target which is close by. For the same relative movement of that target, your traverse is much bigger when it is closer to you. So therefore, at the start, fight from distance. And if there's one lesson to take away from this review of this tank, it would be that, guys. See their Confederate badge, and you know, as I always say, when you're in a TD, what you want is sniper tanker badges, Confederate badges, sharpshooter badges. That's what they're much more important in mastery games, because you know, mastery, you know, okay, it's great to get, but a TD, you're really a support vehicle, right? You're there, your gun is there to support your team. Your gun is there to support with doing damage. So therefore, Confederate, sniper tanker, these are the badges you want when you have a TD. As with the first game we looked at, in this map Fort Despair, I'm going to use the speed of the tank to get into what I believe is a good tank destroyer position. So I'm going to come up to the ruins here just before C. I'm going to go to the far abandoned parapet here in the fort and open up some fields of fire into C. This is a good position for a TD if you can get to it before the enemy starts to capture C. And you can see here the power to weight ratio and that top speed allows you to get in there. Whether or not the enemy appears, you know, there's not much you can do about that. If you look here, you just see just how slow that traverse is. It is glacial slow, and until you're used to that, it will get you killed. You know, sometimes I've heard players say that they actually thought the turret was broken because it was taking so long to come around. Unfortunately, that's one of the drawbacks of the Wolverine. It is a great tank, it is a great TD, it has great characteristics, its power to weight ratio, its gun handling, its maneuverability in terms of its top speed, but its turning arc when you're trying to corner and move around in this, and its traverse are awful and can cause serious problems for you, so you need to be aware of that. And that's why, again, I emphasize at the start, fight from distance in this tank. As you can see, once you get a target, the gun is really good. The gun handling is good. That G index of just under 10k is great for a tier 5. So really, you know, this tank is very effective once you are aware and play to its limitations. You can see backing up here, also the power to ratio, weight ratio helps, it's good. And you see the traverse in action there. I thought I'd be able to snap a shot into him, but traverse is just appalling. And that is the major limitation of this tank, so just bear that in mind. I can't emphasize it enough. And I want you to avoid the problems that so many players have with this tank, and why so many players struggle with this tank. But once you get on targets, once you have them in your sight, and once you're able to align the gun with your targets, this tank won't let you down. In terms of gun handling, the gun delivers time and time again. And it's not just about its theoretical DPM, which is just over 15k, its actual DPM is great because of that good gun handling. So we're going to cap a base again here. Again, as I always say, in Supremacy, cap when you can. So cap early, cap often, because it's about gaining points. And how many times have you seen a Supremacy game where you lose, even though you're maybe 1, 2, sometimes even 3 tanks up, and you still lose because of points? So what you want to do is you want to cap, and now we have an advantage 2 bases, and now it puts pressure on the enemy as well. It puts pressure on the Reds because they know they have to either take you out or they have to cap, and they have to leave safe positions, etc. So it's important to do that. Again, look at the traverse here. It's just awful traverse. But you know, you need to be aware of that. And once you're aware of it, by the way, you can do things that can mitigate that. As we said, one of those is firing from distance, engaging the enemy from distance, so that you have that minimal traverse that you need to do. You keep your aiming arc to a minimum. It's basic mathematics. It is basic. It's basic geometry, and you can't argue with that, right? So, and I always say, you know, I'm a kind of simple guy. I like facts, and I like facts and like mathematics and stuff like that, rather than just people's opinions. Everybody has an opinion, but you can't really argue with geometry and mathematics. Mastery game delivered there again, just with 1.4k, but probably the extra base is captured, and extra couple of kills delivered a mastery badge there. So let's have a recap. This is an effective TD, has great characteristics that you want in a TD. Also, those characteristics are great for training for later tiers. So, for example, the Jackson or the Hellcat you go after are very similar. The 96mm gun is effective, a decent pen, decent reload. So this really helps. You want to get the top gun first, I think, because TDs are all about the gun. Yes, the speed and that is all good, but you want to be if you're fighting from distance, you want that top gun. 6.24 second reload, going up to 6.71 if you use calibrated shells. I don't, but you know, a lot of people do prefer that. Both work on this tank. Good power to weight ratio, and this tank can move. When you get the top engine, you'll see that. But the traverse is horrible. It's horrible. It's truly awful. So fight from distance at the start. But the gun alignment is great in terms of depression, elevation, etc. So utilize that. Also bear in mind that gun depression and the good concealment make it a good distance fighter. So why not utilize that, particularly at the start? Don't be tempted into playing as a medium at the start. Get into position, stay safe at the start, utilize your good gun handling, the almost 10,000 gun index, fight from distance, at least at the start anyway, until you become more familiar with the traverse and the turning arcs on this tank. But when you start off, fight from distance, and you won't be disappointed with this tank, because it is a very, very effective tank destroyer. Cheers much, thanks for watching. I hope you found it useful, I hope you found it enjoyable, I hope you fight from distance, and I guess all remains for me now to say is pants off.